Hiya 12, hope you're all good. Just a quite short video today, I think. I'm just going to talk you through some really kind of basic overall contexty things and then explain the tasks to you. Most of what you're doing today you can be doing by yourselves, but so I will be here just to kind of get you started. So on Monday we found out about this kind of major turning point in Athelred's reign. We looked at those first renewed raids from the Vikings that take place during the 980s, and we looked at how that kind of culminated in this Battle of Maldon in 991, which resulted in a terrible defeat for the English and a major change in strategy. So, what we're going to look at today is what happens in the rest of Athelred's reign vis-a-vis the Vikings. He rules for quite a long time. I think his reign's something like 37 years long, the longest of any king we've studied, actually. And he pretty much spends that entire time, apart from that monastic crisis at the very beginning, being attacked by Vikings. So it's a difficult time, and obviously, ultimately, in the end, the Vikings are successful. They do what no other Viking has done in a previous king, and they do take over England. So we need to look at what that process is, and a big part of what we're considering at the moment is how far that can be blamed on Athelred. And how far he really was unready, he really was a bad king. Okay? So, keyword today was Danegeld. Okay, and that is just simply, it's what the name would suggest. We've talked about Vergeld before, blood money. Okay, the money you pay as compensation when you kill someone. All right, Danegeld is, well, the name kind of gives it away. It is money paid to Danes, to Vikings, to get rid of them. And Athelred actually brings it in as an official tax taken over the year. Your year's income is taxed in order to pay off Vikings, and that tax is first introduced in 1012 in the face of a Viking invasion that we'll find out about shortly. So that kind of encapsulates the big change in strategy that happens after Maldon. Okay, prior to Maldon, we've been having lots of raids along the southern coast, but they've been fairly localised. They haven't really been hugely damaging or coordinated. They've been a pain, but they haven't been, kind of world-ending. Maldon is obviously a massive turning point. It's this huge invasion that results in a terrible defeat for the English. Now, prior to Maldon, there had been a sort of factionalism situation going on in the kind of English government, whereby there was kind of, you could almost call it sort of hawks and doves, like you see in the Cold War. All right, so you think there's hawks, there are ealdormen and nobles who think that the strategy should be fight the Vikings, fight to the last man, even if it means doom and death. And then there's also the doves who suggest, no, let's not fight them, let's pay them off. All right, now Bertenoth was very much a hawk, the ealdorman of Essex, who is murdered, destroyed at Maldon, as was obvious by his ridiculous strategy in that battle, which was allowing the Vikings to cross the land bridge, having trapped them so they could fight properly, which obviously leads to his death. After he dies, and Maldon is obviously a terrible debacle, there's lots of death and massacre, huge numbers of English killed, there is a change, and the doves start to win, okay, in the sense that Athelred is convinced to change his approach, and the main person who seems to be responsible for this is Archbishop Sigeric of Canterbury, along with various ealdormen from Wessex. And what they suggest is, Athelred, let's not fight them anymore. You saw what happened at Maldon, it was pretty bad. Let's pay them off. So the first payment goes to Olaf Tryggvason, the Viking leader faced at Maldon, and he is paid 10,000 Roman pounds of silver. Now, just a reminder, that is not pounds as in pounds that we have now, it is literal pounds of weight. Huge number. And if you remember, when Alfred died, his will that we were so impressed by, he distributed around £2,000 of cash when he died. So this is a huge sum. All right, and it's the first kind of time that Athelred really takes on this new strategy, this idea of paying the Vikings off. Okay, and so it becomes a big theme of his reign. Now, I think what's important to contextualise here is the scale of the threat has changed. The nature of the Viking threat has changed. For quite some time now in this course, obviously Alfred faced Danes. He faced Danes that came from Denmark. He faced the Great Heathen Army, Ubba, Halfdan, Ivar the Boneless. They came over from Denmark and obviously caused him lots of problems. But kind of since then, since Edward took the Danelaw, Athelstan's reign onwards, really it's been Irish Vikings we've been worrying about from Dublin. Okay, so not actually directly from Denmark at all. They were initially Danes, but they went to, so they're actually Irish Vikings that we've been dealing with primarily, and with the odd Norwegian thrown in, such as Eric Bloodaxe. Now, while that's been going on, actual Denmark has been basically mirroring what's been happening in England. So we've been looking, the whole course is called The Making of England. We've been looking at how the various kings have expanded and consolidated and centralised their power to make England a single unified country. The same thing has been happening in Denmark. Okay, so what was previously a whole bunch of lots of different little kingdoms and bands and tribes of Vikings has become a unified single force. Okay, and that happened under a king called Harold Bluetooth. Now, this is a fun little pub quiz fact, all right? We've all heard of Bluetooth. You have it on your phone, it connects to speakers and so on. It is named after this guy, Harold Bluetooth. Okay, and you can see that from the Bluetooth logo. If you look, it's made up of two runes, H and B, Harold Bluetooth, alright, and that's why it's called Bluetooth. He was probably called that, not because he was wirelessly connective, but because he had a bad tooth, alright, but the reason they call Bluetooth, as in the thing that you have on your phone, the reason it's called Bluetooth is because it unites devices. So two separate phones can communicate via Bluetooth. A separate speaker and a phone can communicate via Bluetooth. And the idea is that that is similar to how Harold Bluetooth united Denmark. He united lots of separate kingdoms to become one. Okay, supposedly the guy that invented Bluetooth was reading a book about the Vikings at the time, which is where that comes from. So Harold Bluetooth, he has not only consolidated and unified Denmark into a single country, he has also, as you can see from this image here, been baptized. So he also makes Denmark into a Christian country. It's not just a random rabble of lots of Danish warbands, it is now a coordinated single kingdom called Denmark, under a Christian king with a single church. So kind of similar to what's been happening in England, which obviously changes the nature of the threat. And we can see this because if you look at what kind of is happening in terms of their military capacity, this unified country is becoming much, much more dangerous. So we have these things called ring forts. Now, if you remember earlier on in the course, we looked at what Alfred did with the Boers, and that was a really good indicator of the increased power of England. The same thing is happening in Denmark. So here's a sort of reconstruction of one here, this very sort of big wooden fortress. They would have looked like this. This is the remains of one at Freikat on a big hill, earthwork defences. So those forts, they're done to a pre-designed plan and they're very well fortified and they're huge. Okay, and that indicates just how strong Denmark has become. And along with that comes bigger armies and bigger navies. So Denmark has become quite the foe in the years since kind of we've been looking at what's been going on in England. And this is where kind of they enter the game again in Athelred's reign. So Bluetooth, whilst he was very good at unifying the country, he wasn't so good at unifying his own family, because his own son, called Sweyn Forkbeard, deposes him in 980 and takes over Denmark for himself. It is Sweyn Forkbeard that is then shortly going to turn his attention to England and ultimately conquer England, doing what no other Viking before has ever managed. Okay, so we'll come back to him in a minute because you're going to find out a lot more about him soon. So, the remainder of Athelred's reign, you can basically divide it into 4 phases of invasion. I'm not going to go into loads of detail here because you're about to read about them, but basically there's phase 1, which we've already looked at, which is all that raiding along the south, okay, where he ends up making an agreement with Normandy because he's afraid they're being used as a launch pad, okay, which they were, all right. The Normans had Danish heritage, which is why they were helping them. Phase 2 begins with Malden, okay, that big turning point, that pivotal battle, and we then see a variety of events happening after that, ultimately concluding in 1005 when there is a famine that drives the Vikings from England. Phase 3 then comes in the middle, and that's another couple of Vikings, a guy called Tostig and a guy called Thorkel the Tall. They are both paid off with enormous sums of Danegeld, as you can see. Okay, massive, massive sums. And then finally, phase 4 is the actual conquest of England, where Sweyn Forkbeard comes back, he takes it over, he is then later succeeded by his son Canute, who then becomes the Danish King of England, and continues to rule England until 1042, when Athelred's son finally gets to be king, and he's called Edward the Confessor, and he dies in 1066. And well, back to year 7. All right, that's when we get the Battle of Hastings and the Normans taking over England. So, what I'm going to ask you to do is read through a document I've put on Show My Homework for you called The Story of the Viking Invasion. And I'm going to ask you to read through all of that and create yourself a timeline, just so you get a sense of that chronology, because quite a lot goes on, and I think it's really important you know the order of it all. So you're going to create yourself a timeline, as ever, in as much detail and depth as you can. Who, what, when, where, how, why, all that precise detail. And when you've created that timeline, what I'd like you to do is then go through and colour code it to show which Viking leader is active when. Because there's quite a few of them. So initially you've got Olaf Tryggvason, he's the one at Malden, Thorkel the Tall, Tostig, Sweyn Forkbeard, and then finally Canute. So I'm going to ask you to colour code that timeline to show who is active when. Okay, so that's your kind of main activity today. All right, hopefully it shouldn't take you too long to do, but as I say, do it in detail, please. When you have done that, what we're then going to do, just some nice pictures. Okay, as you can see, Edmund Ironside, Ethelred's son, dies in a nasty way, gets shot by a crossbow when he's on the toilet. Not ideal. When you've made that timeline, what you're going to do is you're going to then look at another document, which is going to give you lots more detail on how Ethelred faced this massive, insurmountable Viking attack, and you are going to look at those strategies and think, okay, what was good and what was bad? So what did he do that was a good strategy? What was effective? What were the good things about his approach? And on the contrary, what were the bad things? What were the less effective means he enacted? And he does do a number of things. Obviously, there is military response. He also issues new coinage. It's called the Agnus Dei coinage. You can see an example here. Got the Lamb of God and the Dove of God on it. The idea is it's symbols of peace. Okay, so there's a big kind of religious drive to get God back on side, which is supported by this, which is called the Sermon of the Wolf to the English, Sermo Lupi ad Anglos. Okay, which you'll find out a lot more about in that document. Okay, so we're going to look at all these different strategies, tell me what is good about them and what is bad about them, and we'll go through this together in tomorrow's lesson. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off the story for you here because I think it's nice to join those dots. We are obviously pretty much at the end of the course now, 10:16. There's a few little bits more we need to do, but we are pretty much there. So, interestingly, this all kind of cycles round to year 7 and what you would have done when you first started learning history at secondary school, which is the Norman Conquest. So basically what happens is 1017, Canute dies. He marries Athelred's widow, okay, Emma of Normandy. So that's important, Normans, okay. He then dies a little bit later. His son takes over, Harold Harefoot. That's his son with his first wife. Harefoot then dies very shortly afterwards, and this is when one of Emma's sons gets to take over, Arthur Canute. He then dies, all right, and the only sort of relative of Canute left is Edward, who is Athelred's son with Emma. Edward, who we now know as Edward the Confessor. Okay, he comes back over from Normandy. He rules England until 1066, at which point he dies without an heir. And initially he is succeeded by Harold Godwinson, who is at this time the Earl of Wessex, which I think shows you just how things have changed. Remember, Alfred was King of Wessex at the start. We had lots of different ealdormen of the shires. We now just have an Earl of the whole of Wessex. Remember, Earl comes from the Danish term Jarl, so you can see how that's changed. So Harold Godwinson takes over first of all. He is then invaded by the Normans, by William of Normandy, William the Bastard. He catches an arrow in the eye at the Battle of Hastings. There he is, bless him. And William takes over as William the Conqueror. Alright, so our course very much gets to that Norman conquest. We have really learned about the last kind of couple of hundred years of Anglo-Saxon rule, and that really sets the tone for that invasion, I think, and that kind of ultimate victory of the Vikings, effectively. Because obviously the Normans are descended from Vikings. So there we go. Okay, guys, as ever, if you have any questions, please do get in touch. Just a reminder, your Edgar essay is due in tomorrow. I'm going to give you a little bit of time in tomorrow's lesson to work on that, but predominantly I'm going to give you something else to do as well related to this. So please do make sure you've made good progress on that ahead of tomorrow. Hopefully you've already started it. What I will also say is next Wednesday I would like to do a Zoom lesson just to go over all of this Viking business because there's a lot there. So if you think you're not going to be able to make that, you need to let me know in advance, please. But otherwise, I will see you all then. Okay, guys, have a nice afternoon. Good luck. As I say, if you have any problems, do let me know. and I'll speak to you soon.